computer. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemen. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on day 307 of the war. 307, an unimaginable number of days that the hostages have been in captivity. We pray for their swift release. We know that these prayers are just a way of expressing the sentiments, the feelings that we have, the helplessness sometimes also. And we know that Israel is going through a very tense time. This week is a very, very tense week in anticipation of what we think might happen, a counterattack from wherever. But we're here to talk about the Torah, and we're here to talk about this Parsha, which is in this new book, Devarim. In a way, it gives us comfort, but we'll talk about that as part of the question that I have driving this conversation really is, can we describe this book, and can we describe what Moses is doing in this book? Just at the outset, the book is composed of three long discourses, one at the beginning, one long one in the middle, and then a shorter one at the end, and then a couple of appendices at the end, final blessings, final poems, final accounts, etc. But it's a long set of speeches. According to the time stamps in the book, it takes place over several weeks, couple of weeks, as the Israelites are ending the 40 years of their wandering in the desert. And I have different reactions to these speeches. But I want to ask you what you think is going on in this book. What is Moses's objective in these speeches, that are the speeches that are recounted for us in the book of Devarim? What do you think his goals are? What do you think the speeches are about? And I'll turn to you, Barry, first for that.
Thank you. I think one way to look at Deuteronomy is that it's a kind of an ethical will. So people are supposed to write wills in anticipation of their death in order to dispose of their property and money, shall we say. And there's a longstanding Jewish tradition to write an ethical will. What are the values that the person writing the will wants to leave to his or her descendants? And I think one way to look at Devarim is that this is Moses with his last opportunity to take a long look back at the last 40 years, plus the time in Egypt, and give the people a message of what he has experienced as their leader, so that when they enter the promised land under Yehoshua, they will be able to be successful in establishing their nation on its land.
Jeremy, what do you think is going on?
So first of all, I love that ethical will thought. Moshe is going to tell them a whole lot of stuff. Much of it is going to be contained in the laws in Devarim. All of Devarim is a first-person narrative. You know, that very characteristic biblical phrase doesn't appear in Deuteronomy. Right? And God said to Moses, saying, "Tell the people." It's all this first-person narrative, including all the laws of Parshat, Eicha and Re'eh and Shoftim, Kitetse, and that is about shaping a religious vision for the people. Deuteronomy has its unique religious vision that so deeply shapes Judaism, because all of the stuff about teach your children, think about it, take it to heart, take it. The Deuteronomy has an incredibly strong commitment to the mental life, the inner life, what goes on, inside the head and heart. That's Deuteronomy's wheelhouse. So Moses is teaching them a whole way to be religiously and a whole set of behaviors which instantiate that. There's a phrase I'm looking for it here in the first parasha, the first parak rather, and I know it's here, but I'm not finding it right away. But I know also it appears in 7. So let me just scoot myself to Deuteronomy chapter 7.
What's the phrase?
Deuteronomy chapter 7, and what part is that? That's Akev, and it says, Lo ta'arotz mipnehem, ki Adonai Elohecha b'kirbecha el gadol v'nora. You know, you've got a lot of scary people. You've got enemies. You've got the people say to themselves, they said it in Numbers, they're going to repeat it now. These people are so big, they're giants, they're b'nei ha'anak. They're literally giants. We are so small. And Moshe says to them, chapter 7, verse 21, Lo ta'arotz mipnehem. Don't be afraid of them. You worry about you. Ki Adonai Elohecha b'kirbecha. You have a divine presence in your community. I really feel in 2024 the power of that message when we've got so many intimidating enemies in the land of Israel, enemies in the diaspora, anti-Semites from the left, anti-Semites from the right. That's a Canadian pop song, I think, isn't it? Isn't that? Jokers to the left of me, jokers to the right, stuck in the middle. Lo ta'arotz mipnehem. Don't be afraid. And I just
So
that may not cover all of what Moshe has to say, but it's
sure.
a big
Okay.
part of what Moshe has to say.
That's a theme that's coming at you, that's something going to guide us. And in addition, I like, of course, and want to amplify what you said about the educational mission, the educative mission of the book of Deuteronomy. I want to point out one little thing, which is, one theme that comes at it, which is the land, which we're going to see more of in a couple of parshas, in Parshat Eicha especially. But it's Moses outside the land, and the people going into the land, and that whole sense that here we are really at a boundary, and this is a boundary set of speeches. These are, the kinds of things that someone would say as a conclusion. The technical term is a valedictory, right? So your valedictorian is the person who gives the speech as you conclude that part of your lives, and I think that's an apt term. But what the overriding irony of the book is that they're talking about going into the land, and of course Moses is not going to go into the land, and that is highlighted in this parsha as well, that God was angry. Gam bi hitanaf, God was angry with me because of you, and I'm not going into the land. But my point is that he may not be going into the land, but the words are going to go into the land. That's a point that Micha Goodman makes in his study of Deuteronomy. It's a nice idea that it's like, I may not get there with you. I'm definitely not going to be there with you. But, and it never says it in the book of Deuteronomy. It's never self-conscious in the way that I'm giving you this long filibuster of a speech or speeches because I want my words to go in, with you, because I'm not going in with you. And in fact, in Judaism, the words
You
are with us
alluded
every
to
day.
you alluded to MLK, of course, and he said
Yes.
the night before he's killed, I may not get there with you, but
I may not get there with you. It's a classic. Yeah.
So I think that it's probably hardly anyone real person, to the degree that is true of Martin Luther King, his life just really fit a biblically powerful drama of the reluctant prophet who rises to the occasion, and then the people are left bereft. I mean, he's a real person, so he's not a figure in an ancient book. So we know all kinds of things about him. We know certain things that aren't so nice about him. We know that in his own lifetime he had rivals and enemies, and he's not just Moshe Rabbeinu in an ancient book. But I think that there's something about Judaism that every person who has inherited it, every single person who has inherited the Torah, or the written Torah and the later books of the Bible and the rabbinic tradition as follows. Every single one of us knows that our greatest leader is already dead. And we are already bereft of the best leader. So we've inherited somebody, we've inherited his words, we brought the words with us into the next challenges, the promised land, which has its own challenges, the diaspora, which has its challenges. And we had Moshe Rabbeinu, and nobody knows where he's buried. So the fact that he ends up this book dead and really, really absent,
Right.
to me is just such a powerful religious reality, because that's what it is to inherit a tradition that is spiritual,
So-
that is wonderful, and just irresistibly incomplete. You can't get your arms around it.
Right.
And that actually may be one of the reasons why the book comes to be identified as Moses's book. Right? We call the Chumash, Chumeshet
Torah
Chumshin
Moshe, yeah.
Torah Shel Moshe, the 5 books of Moses, because as you said, this book is wrapped up in Moses. And by taking the Torah into the land, we take Moshe with us.
So it's interesting. I just want to add a parenthetical thought, which is, in Judaism, the greatest accolade that we can give to someone is that I'm thinking of Maimonides, right? Moshe ad Moshe lokam Moshe, right? You're always judged on in relationship to the greatest, to Moshe, and the fact that the greatest person in our history was means that there will no longer be one. Will always be aspirational. Even Moses Maimonides knew that he wasn't Moses, or maybe he did. I don't know.
Well, I think that his adversaries knew he wasn't Moses.
Do you think maybe he, lots of study on whether or not Maimonides aspired to prophecy, and I remember reading a couple of those or thinking about that. Even, the late, lamented Abraham Joshua Heschel, was, I think he writes about that. But
that was one of Heschel, as a very young man, wrote that question and does think that Maimonides aspired to prophecy. But of course, to be a prophet, this is a very long section of the guide for the perplexed. But to be a prophet is to be somebody with great illumination about philosophical truths and the ability to translate them through what Rambam calls the faculty of imagination, into things that people can absorb. Moshe Rabbeinu is unique. This is one of the key arguments in the Guide for the Perplexed. Moshe Rabbeinu is by definition the maximum prophet because he has all of the knowledge, because God up there in Exodus 34, I will show you avirat kol tuvi al panecha. I'll show you all my goodness, and you're going to get it all, and he's going to grasp it without the distorting facts of turning it into imagination and poetry. So Moshe Rabbeinu is like, by definition, you can't bowl more than 300. You can't get more than 1,600 on your SAT. He has the most, and no one else can beat it. And I think that the reason that Rambam is so insistent upon this is because he lives in an Islamic country, and they said that Muhammad actually surpassed Moses. No, that cannot be. Moses has to be the first by definition.
Interesting. Wow. Well, okay. So one of my or questions to both of you is there's a lot of difficulty in this book too, because I kind of want it to be softer, gentler. I want a certain kind of character of Moses here. There's a lot of rebuke here. So the question I have here, and it comes out in the reading of one of the verses in the first chapter, which is Eicha esa levadi tarchachem umasa achem v'rivchem. When finally, it's right at the beginning of the speech, by the way, where Moses is recounting their encampment at Sinai, and God says it's time to go, go. And then Moses says, well, how am I going to take you? You're so big, I can't manage you. Eicha esa levadi, how am I going to carry by myself karchachem, masachem, berivchem, your difficulties, your burdens, and your quarrels? And the question is, what's the tone here? And many places later on in the book will get a kind of caustic tone, accusatory tone. Is this tochacha? Is this rebuke? Or is this kina a kind of lamentation? And of course, I'm saying the word kina, knowing that in the following, a week from on Tuesday next week, we are going to observe Tisha B'Av, and we're going to read the book of Eicha. But I'm reminded of this debate, machloket, in Eicha Rabbah, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, who talk about this very, very idea, which is Eicha Lashon Tochacha, the language of rebuke, or is Eicha Lashon Kina, the language of lamentation? So is this book a book of rebuke, or is this book a book of, Gewalt, Oi Gewalt? What, and I'm saying it without being too sentimental. There's a lot of pain in this book, and there's a lot of pain in the Jewish people now. I want to read it with the valence of there's a lot of lamentation. We're reading everything from October the 7th with lamentation, with a sense of brokenness. So this book is broken in some way, or Moses is broken here, or is there brokenness, or is it rebuke? And I don't know how you weigh in on these questions here. Barry, you want to?
So I would call it loving rebuke. And I think that the distinction that I would make between rebuke and lamentation is lamentation in some sense seems to indicate a wallowing in despair. There doesn't seem to be a lot of hope in the lament. Rebuke, I think, can have a hopeful dimension to it, because the purpose of the rebuke is not to remind the person of his or her failings, but to spur that person to do better. And I think it was last week we were talking about the wilderness experience, the 40 years of the wilderness, which in a sense is the great theme of the book of the Midbar, which we concluded last week. And I think in some ways that was a failure, right? The people did a lot of terrible things. But what Moses is reminding them here in Devarim is, it's true, you messed up and you did some terrible things, and I did some things I should not have done. But we have to pick ourselves up again every day and try to do better. And this is how we could do it. I
just want to react to it, which is, sometimes it feels like with the rebuke, it's like a smack. You get smacked. And I'm not sure I feel the sense of yes, we can after getting smacked. On the other hand,
okay. When you were giving the introduction earlier, I was thinking that the Devarim shares something with Bimidbar and Vayikra, which is that it seems to have a kind of coda at the end that doesn't quite fit in with the book. But the last chapter of Leviticus and Numbers don't quite fit in with the chapter that came before, and I suppose one can argue that with the Devarim as well. However, what we could say with the blessing of Moses is that at the very end, the last thing that Moses says to the people is the blessing. And the blessing is hopeful, because Moses is telling the people that they can persevere, that they can be victorious, not just in a military sense, but in a personal, religious, and spiritual sense as well.
This is, as I said before, Al Ta'arotz Mipneihem is very, very key. And yes, there is a rebuke in this book. Yes, there is, they go into the land and they're going to have all kinds of challenges. Both at very tail end of Numbers. This is a small sort of quasi halachic thing that I think is really interesting. the tail end of Numbers, and then again in Deuteronomy, they repeat the mitzvot of the cities of refuge. Like, you're gonna in this land, you're gonna come. Sometimes you're gonna kill each other by accident, and you're gonna have to figure out how to deal with, blood guilt. And to me, that's just a statement that going to the promised land doesn't mean it's all going to be jiggy. It's going to sometimes be very, very hard. I think that's true. And yet, I'm going to say, you're going to have to deal with these hard things, and you can, and you will. And I agree with you very much, Barry, that the overall sweep points towards something hopeful. And I'm going to go on this particular question that you asked because of how we read it, liturgically how we read it. In these summer months, that the Eicha word just inescapably for me connotes kina, connotes lament. And many people have, made the observation that we have this week 3 times, at least more than 3, but we read the book of Lamentations, which is Eicha yashva vadad ha'ira batiyam. How is it possible with, like, it's beyond our ability to understand, it's beyond our ability to bear. How is it possible, the devastation? And I'm sure you guys have seen, I've crossed my inboxes as everybody else, a few poems from Israel that have an October 7th themes of Eicha. It so happens this year, by the way, that this is the what number? In August 12th, 19 something 52, I think, was the night of the murdered poets. Stalin killed a bunch of Yiddish poets, and it happens to fall on the day of Tisha B'Av. And Chaim Grada, the great Yiddish writer, also wrote a dirge for them that has a lot of Eicha in it. But so we have the Book of Lamentations. We have those other later traditions. We have this case that you talked about, Elliot, about how can I carry you? And there's in the Haftarah as well.
Right.
In Isaiah chapter 21, chapter 1, verse 21, which is the Haftarah for this weekend. Eicha hayta lezona kirya ne'emana. How is it, oy, Eicha, how is it that the faithful city has become a harlot? Meleati mishpat tzedek yalin ba ve'ata meratzchim. This great place of justice was filled with righteousness, and tzedek, righteousness, dwelled in her in the midst of the city. Ve'ata meratzchim, and now it's nothing but murderers.
Yeah.
So I just, analyzing the text of Deuteronomy, apart from its public reading, maybe we could argue either way. But when you read on one Shabbos, the Shabbos always just before Tisha B'Av, the Eicha phrase in Deuteronomy, the Eicha phrase in Isaiah, the Eicha phrase in Lamentations on Tisha B'Av, and then the many other iterations in Jewish literature, Book of Esther. How is it that I can bear all these terrible things I'm seeing? To me, it just sounds
so for our advanced listeners, I would direct them to the first chapter of Eicha Rabbah, Midrash Rabbah, Eicha, which actually links all of these 3 texts: the text of Eicha chapter 1 in Deuteronomy, the text from Isaiah 21, Deuteronomy chapter 1, Isaiah chapter 1, and Eicha chapter 1, in which the word Eicha is prominently listed, and it gives us a beautiful midrash on the linkage between these 3 Eichas, as we've described, and the metaphor of God having many, the matrona, a Roman matron with 3 attendants, or three companions, one who will see her in splendor, that's Deuteronomy, one who sees her in disgrace, and one who sees her in total despair. And that is a lovely midrash in Deuteronomy. Let's talk for a second. We have a few minutes. Anticipating Tisha B'Av this year, and as painful as it is, I'm, having just come back from Israel, and this was part of the conversation. People were talking about, it's going to be impossible to recite Eicha. This is going to be impossible to observe Tisha B'Av the way that we've always. It's going to be impossible to think about things that are, 2,000 years ago, when 10 months ago Israel experienced and the Jewish people experienced this convulsion and this tremendous massacre and have been in the throes of this ever since. Some people have been saying it's been one long Tisha B'Av. I wouldn't go that far, because we've tried at least to go through the cycle of a year, notwithstanding the fact that for 120 families of hostages, it's been one long nightmare. But and in light of the fact that so much literature and so much moving music also on the October 7th has come out, how are we orienting ourselves towards Tisha B'Av this year? Is there any thoughts that we can give to this, or is October 7th going to be one more event in the long history of Jewish history that will, it's not going to get kind of layered onto Tisha B'Av because it didn't happen on Tisha B'Av, but will it be associated in some way as this catastrophe?
One of the things that is on my mind about this, I may have said this in some previous iteration. I wrote a little post of this to my shul. The 17th of Tammuz is my favorite fast. I love this fast because it's associated with Moshe breaking the tablets. Moshe comes down from the mountain. The people are worshiping a golden calf. The Torah, which should be intact, gets smashed into a million pieces. And that speaks to me very poetically about the world that we live in. Sometimes the wonderful people of Israel will fall from its height and worship idols. And sometimes the Torah, which should make everything, cohere together, make sense, remain intact, is smashed into a million pieces. And whose fault is that? It's ours. It's ours for worshiping the golden calf. It's ours as the inheritors of Moshe's rage. It's on us. And I think that's fundamentally empowering to say, why was the temple destroyed? Sinat chinam. We hated each other. We didn't build a society of love. This is our fault. In Tisha B'Av, it has a tendency to, whose fault? This is the Romans. This is the Babylonians. These are all these other people. And that has a way of, while being real, because everybody knows that it wasn't really Sinat Chinam, it was, geopolitical factors. But if you say it's Sinat Chinam and your failure to love each other, then you can take away something that changes your behavior. So on October 7th, fighting evil, fighting Hamas, fighting Hezbollah, this is important. We should do this. And I like the dynamic of Jewish responses to suffering that says that whatever suffering comes upon us, we should do tshuva. And we should figure out what we've done wrong. And I'm just, my concern about Israel is just growing because of Iran, growing because of Hezbollah, growing because of Hamas, growing because of, many other things, and growing because in the last week, we saw right-wing extremists storm a Tzahal base to free people who had abused prisoners, and Haredi extremists storm a Tzahal base to protest the drafting of Haredi soldiers. I there's relatively little I can do about Hamas. I sort of want to say, I cannot believe what I'm watching. The citizenry of the Jewish people. We better do tshuva.
Well, so I would go back to the idea of kina, which is lamentation, which is those scenes which you described are visceral in the sense of they make us react. I think with nausea. I don't want to be too graphic in a family podcast here, but you feel quite sick about this, and lamentation is an evocation of all of the cascade of emotions, and yet let's not forget that even as the book itself, book of Eicha, ends on a down note, the tradition appends the recitation of the the penultimate verse at the end. Return us as of old, days of old, renew our days as of old. Hashivenu Adonai Alecha, return us to you, God. V'nashuva, and we will return. Chadesh yameinu kekedem, renew our days as of old. Which, as problematic as that verse is, it does say we gotta look ahead to renewal, and we have to understand that we're never going to be the same, but we do have to renew ourselves in some way.
So to try and tie all of this together, I think that first of all, it's too early to say how the war will be integrated into Tisha B'Av or other observances, because the war has not come to
We're in
an
it.
end.
We're still in it. Yeah.
Right. But I think that what gives Tisha B'Av its power is that it's a commemoration of the past. And as a commemoration of the past, with the litany of catastrophes that have befallen the Jewish people for upwards of 2,000 years, it's can be practically unbearable. But when it's present, that's alachai kama v'chama, so much worse.
Yeah.
And there's a presentness now that makes it so difficult this year because we can't regard it as a past yet. But I think, and this may have been brought to my attention originally by Jacob Neusner in his book on Yochanan ben Zakkai, the key liturgically and spiritually to Tisha B'Av is the 10th of Av. It's getting up the next day and rebuilding the world. And, that's where Teshuvah comes in, I think, Jeremy, as you so nicely put it. And our focus has to be ultimately on making the world better. There's a time for despair and a time for commemoration, but as Jeremiah said last week, there's also a time to build and to rebuild. And I think that as rabbis, we have to hope and pray that that time will come very soon.
Yes, I look. I think that in contemporary Israeli discourse, people talk about October the 6th. They talk about the world of before and the world of after, and that the post-October 7th world is a different world. It's going to require a lot of rebuilding, physical rebuilding, and of course internal building, rebuilding. None of which is happen. We're of course not ready for that. Nobody's ready for it. There's still a war going on and still imminent danger, as we speak. And yet, what's comforting is that we can sit here on the eve of an annual commemoration of national catastrophes and say, okay, here's the arc of our commemoration. We're going to lament. We're going to go through this. We're going to recite these books and recite the different kinot and the different lamentations, the different psalms and songs, Elitzion and all of that, and the fast will end. We'll have a moment after the fast too. There'll be plenty of things to cry about and plenty of things to hope for.
Rebuild the temple from the inside out. That's what it is.
We got to do that. And so maybe that's
the Mishkan.
Right, with all the scenes of destruction, all the terrible personal stories of loss that have gone this year. We're in a moment where we need nechama. We need those 7 weeks afterwards. And maybe the 7 weeks after Tisha B'Av will come to all of us, not only with the sense of comfort for Tisha B'Av, of course, but comfort for the whole Jewish people. And that's what we hope for. And that's a good way to draw our conversation to a conclusion. Wishing everyone who's listening to us, first of all, thank you. We appreciate your spending the time with us. Thank you, Camp Ramah of the Berkshires, where we are still #1 Parasha podcast. And thank you to Mitch Mernick and everybody who puts us on, the producers, and to all of the friends who write into us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week on the next.
Wait. I want to. We got to say something. Who? Okay, Australian Jewish canoeists.
Okay.
Israeli silver medalist Sharon Cantor.
Nice.
She won a medal in windsurfing. Who else? The Australian canoeists are named. What are their names? Jessica and Nomi Fox, they won Olympic medals together, and I'm sure there are some more.
The wonderful American Israeli wrestler Amit Lior, what's her name? Amit Elor.
And we also, I think Israel had a judo medalist. And last night I watched the spectacular 1,500-meter race in which my landsman, that is to say, he's from Louisville, Kentucky, Negus, I forget his first name, Negus, he's clearly Ethiopian, and I was thinking he was maybe a Jewish Israeli Ethiopian, but I don't think that's correct. But the American won, and the other American from Louisville finished third. It was just an unbelievably thrilling race. And so this Olympics has been awesome. I enjoyed every bit. And congratulations to all the winners, and especially the Jewish winners, because that's who we are.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
from all of
shalom.
us. We'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.